Before he became a legend, he was nothing. No crown, no army, no name that mattered. Just another man, owned. In the vast machine of Roma, millions lived and died without ever being remembered. And Spartacus was supposed to be one of them. Captured, broken, stripped of identity. He was taken from his land, his past erased, forced into a system where survival was the only goal. Not freedom, not honor, survival. He was sold, like an object, like an animal, and sent to one of the most brutal places in the Roman world, a gladiator school. A place where men were not trained to live, but to die well. The crowd didn't care who you were. They didn't care about your past. They only cared about one thing: blood. And Spartacus learned quickly. Every movement mattered. Every mistake meant death. Day after day, he fought. Not for glory, not for victory, but because losing meant the end. And slowly, something began to change. Because Spartacus was not like the others. He adapted faster, fought harder, endured more. Where others broke, he survived. And survival became strength. The Romans saw it. The trainers noticed it. This was not just another slave. This was something dangerous. Because when a man has nothing left to lose, he becomes impossible to control. And deep inside Spartacus, something was growing. Not just anger, not just pain, but something far more powerful. The idea of freedom. At first it was small, a thought, a whisper. But the more he fought, the more he bled, the louder it became. Why fight for their entertainment? Why die for their pleasure? Why accept chains when he could break them? Others felt it too. Gladiators, men who had been reduced to weapons, who had forgotten what it meant to choose. Spartacus didn't give speeches. He didn't promise victory. He only did one thing. He refused to accept his fate. And that was enough. Because rebellion doesn't begin with armies. It begins with a decision, a single moment where fear is no longer stronger than will. And that moment was coming. Soon. Very soon. Revolts don't start loudly. They begin in silence. Whispers, glances, plans made in the dark. Inside the gladiator school in Capua, something was building. Spartacus was not alone. Others had begun to see what he saw, to feel what he felt. They were not warriors by choice, but they could become one by necessity. The plan was simple, dangerously simple. Escape, not fight, not conquer, just survive. But Rome does not let slaves walk away, and everyone knew if they failed, there would be no second chance. The night came. Tension filled the air. Every sound felt louder, every step heavier. And then it began. The revolt was sudden, brutal, improvised. Kitchen tools became weapons. Chains became tools of war. And Spartacus moved first. Because hesitation kills. Violence erupted. Guards were caught off guard. Chaos spread through the school. Some fell, some escaped. But those who followed Spartacus broke through. Out of the gates, into the unknown. They were no longer gladiators, no longer prisoners. But they were not free. Not yet. Because escaping Rome's control is not the same as defeating it. The group fled, outnumbered, untrained as an army, with no real plan beyond survival. But something unexpected happened. Others joined them. Runaway slaves, desperate men, people who had nothing left. The group grew from dozens to hundreds, then more. And Spartacus was no longer just a survivor. He was becoming something else. A leader. They needed direction. They needed purpose. Because a group without a goal doesn't last. And Spartacus made a decision. They would not just run. They would fight. Not for conquest, but for freedom. And that changed everything. Because Rome could ignore fugitives, but it could not ignore rebellion. And soon, the empire would respond. Rome underestimated him. That was their first mistake. What began as a group of escaped slaves was becoming something far more dangerous. An army. Under Spartacus, they trained, they organized, they learned, and most importantly, they believed. Because Spartacus did not lead from behind. He fought, he bled, he stood with them. And that kind of leadership creates loyalty. Rome sent soldiers. At first, small forces, enough to crush what they thought was a minor revolt. They were wrong. Battle after battle, something shocking happened. Spartacus won. Not through superior weapons, not through numbers, but through something Rome had forgotten: adaptation. He used the land, the terrain, surprise, and the fact that his men had nothing to lose. Roman soldiers fought for duty. Spartacus's army fought for freedom. And that difference changed everything. Victories stacked, confidence grew, the rebellion spread, thousands joined, then tens of thousands. And suddenly, Rome was not dealing with a problem. It was facing a threat, a real one. For the first time in a long time, Rome felt pressure, not from another empire, but from within. A slave was defeating Roman legions. Think about that. The most powerful empire in the world being challenged by those it considered nothing. Spartacus had done the impossible. He turned fear into strength, slaves into soldiers, survivors into a force. But success comes with a cost, because the bigger you become, the harder you fall. And Rome was preparing. Rome does not tolerate defiance, not for long. This time, they didn't send small armies. They sent everything. Legions, commanders, strategy. One name stood at the center of it: Marco Licinio Crasso. Ruthless, disciplined, relentless. He would not underestimate Spartacus, and that made him dangerous. The battles changed, no longer chaotic victories. Now, they were calculated. Pressure increased, supplies ran low, the army of Spartacus began to fracture. Some wanted to escape, others wanted to keep fighting. Division spread, and division kills. Spartacus tried to hold it together, but even the strongest leaders cannot control everything. Rome closed in. The final battle was inevitable, and when it came, it was brutal. No tricks, no escape, just war. Spartacus fought at the front, as he always had, not hiding, not retreating, but facing Rome directly, because that's who he was, a man who refused to kneel. The battle raged, and one by one, his army fell. Not because they were weak, but because Rome was Rome, overwhelming, unstoppable. And in the end, Spartacus disappeared into the chaos. His body was never found. No confirmation, no closure, just silence. But sometimes, that's more powerful than an ending, because it leaves something behind, a question, a myth, a legend. They tried to erase him, to make sure his name would be forgotten. But Rome made one mistake. They turned him into an example. Thousands of captured rebels were crucified, lined across the roads, a warning, a message. This is what happens to those who defy Rome. But fear does not always erase memory. Sometimes it preserves it, because people remember what challenges power. They remember those who refuse to submit. Spartacus did not win. He did not conquer Rome. He did not become king. But that was never the point. He proved something far more dangerous, that even the strongest empire in the world can be challenged, that even those with nothing can rise, and that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible, even when the ending is inevitable. Because some battles are not about winning. They are about refusing to accept defeat. And Spartacus never did. And even today, his name echoes through history.